Core 150 this semester, we started learning about the Old Testament, but before we could do that, we had to learn more of the background, like between the differences between stories and narratives. And their main difference is that like a story is more like something that one can relate to, and a narrative is like really what happened and went down. And a story like helps you understand better and like brings it more personally to you. And while a narrative is like a single aim, like what is the Bible for, just bringing it all together and why it's there and what's in there. So then to figure this out, we have a thing called hermeneutics, which is the branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially of the Bible or literary text, which is basically what people do to understand what the Bible is and why it is such a narrative. So then moving on, we went to the Old Testament, where we started off with creation, where it's basically the story of God creating the whole world and everything in it. So on the first day we had the night and day, so we have the sun and the moon here, just representing like that there's night and day. And on the second day, God created the waters above and the waters below, which would be like the oceans, and basically we'll just go with clouds, considering nobody really knows what the waters above are. On day 3, God created land and vegetation, which is all of the trees and everything in it. On day 4, we go to sun to rule the day and moon to rule the night. On day 5, God created the birds to rule the heavens and fish to rule the seas. On day 6, God created land and humanity and let the land produce living creatures. On day 6, God created man and woman to rule the land, animals, fish, and birds, all the earth, to be fruitful and multiply, which is kind of a covenant that God had there. And although there's some debate whether it was just Adam and Eve in the garden or if there's more people and Adam and Eve are just representatives, only God really knows, so who are we to argue with that? And then here we have the Garden of Eden, where all of Adam and Eve, or the rest of their people, presided. And then we go on to Noah. After Adam and Eve's whole story goes down with their kids, Noah comes along and the world gets flooded because all of the world, there's way too much sin going on and God was not for that. And so he wanted a new start. So God flooded the whole earth except for some animals and Noah and his family to restart. And then after the floods went away, there was a rainbow, which symbolized that God promised never to do that again, and that is the Noah's covenant. Then after Noah, we move on to Abraham. Abraham's an interesting one. He has a lot to do in the Old Testament over there, and he is where we start off with his covenant, basically, is that he will have as many descendants as the stars in the sky and sand on the sea. His name was later changed to Israel, which is also the name of God's promised land. Then we go on to Moses. Moses was a baby who is found by the Egyptians, and he delivered God's people from being captive after Abraham's sons basically got captured there and made into slaves. Then after Moses, we move on to Joshua and the judges, and they were the ones wandering the desert, and to have rulers over them, they needed somebody to guide them, basically. And they created judges, one such as Solomon, not Solomon, Samson. And he just rules over them same as Deborah and a bunch of other ones. And after we have Joshua and Judges, we go on to David. And David's covenant is that he will, basically his descendants will lead to Jesus and God, and he will have the royal family. Then after David, we go on to his son Solomon, who built the temple. And then after this temple was built, later on, Israelites were taken over by bigger forces and causing the divide of the country or nation of God and into the northern and southern kingdoms over here. And then the divided kingdoms were led into exile, and Jerusalem was taken over by non-Jews, basically. The people were blinded by their sin and didn't know what was happening, basically. And then slowly through the exile, they began to know what was more or less going on. And then they returned 70 years later of not being in Jerusalem, and they were brought back mostly by Ezra and Nehemiah. And overall, that is mostly what we learned over the course of Core 150 this semester. And yep, that's about it.